Welcome back to the Legal Insight podcast by HHQ, where we help you unpack the world of law, business, tech, and more. Now, in this episode 2, or the second episode of on the topic of the social exchange platform, we continue our deep dive into one of the most exciting regulatory developments in Malaysia's fintech space this year, the guidelines on social exchange platforms newly released by the Securities Commission Malaysia. It's already making waves in the industry because now for the very first time, it introduced a structured regulated mechanism for non-profit organizations to raise funds for social impact projects through the capital market. Think of it like the Bursa stock exchange, but for non-profit organizations. Now, that's quite extraordinary when you think about it, because we've seen the capital market evolve from equity crowdfunding and peer-to-peer financing to digital token offerings, and now we have a framework designed purely for social good. It really shows how far Malaysia has come in building an inclusive financial ecosystem and, just a sense of a maturing society, right? Yep. Now, if you haven't listened to part 1 of the discussion, I strongly encourage you to do so. Pause and go back to episode 26 because that's where we unpack what a social exchange platform is and how it operates. But for those just joining us now, let's set the scene. I'm once again joined by the very handsome Johnson and Khai, the head and co-head of technology practice group at HHQ, both of whom authored HHQ's recent insight on this topic. Now, my first question would be to Khai. Let's start with you. For those who have missed part 1 of our discussion, maybe give us a quick recap in about 2 to 3 minutes. What social exchange platform is all about and why this new framework is so significant for Malaysia's fintech and capital markets landscape.
Thanks for the question, Zach. Social exchange platform, think of it just like Kickstarter, which is a name that I believe most would be familiar with, right? Yeah. Essentially a crowdfunding platform. Instead of allowing companies or allowing startups to raise funds to fund their new ventures, to release their new MVPs, their new products, for example, social exchange platform instead allows non-profit organizations to list their social impact project on the platform for fundraising purpose, for a cause, for a social cause. This is revolutionizing the fundraising scene for social impact projects because we believe that it is the first of its kind, essentially. You mentioned that this is very similar to a capital market, right? SC is overseeing this entire initiative, and then there's Bursa, social exchange platform. It's like Bursa. It allows companies, or in this case, social impact projects, to be listed on their platforms for fundraising purposes, just like listed companies would go to Bursa for listing, right? The whole initiative and the whole mechanism, the whole idea is to create trust and assurance in donors when they contribute to a social impact project. So now, whenever donors go to a social exchange platform to put their money into a particular project, to donate and to contribute in a particular initiative, they can know through the platform that where their money go and what kind of good, so-called, their money is making.
Thanks, Khai. That's really concise and clear. Now, we've heard about the social exchange platforms themselves in episode 26. Now, let's turn towards the fundraising side of things. With this framework now in place, can any organization or even non-profit organization simply decide, okay, I'm going to raise funds through the social exchange platform? Can they just do that? Can they just say, like, okay, I choose this platform and I'm going to raise funds from there? Or are there specific requirements to make them eligible for those fundraising?
Yeah, thanks, Zach, for the question. So the law makes it very clear, the guideline makes it very clear. So only non-profit organizations can actually raise funds using the social exchange platform. And not every company that self-label themselves as a non-profit, they can actually be using that particular platform to raise funds. Fundamentally, according to the guideline, there are 2 main requirements that a non-profit organizations, they must satisfy in order to raise funds through a social exchange platform. So there are 2 requirements, as I mentioned earlier. The first one is the incorporation and the approval status. So number 1, the organization, they must be, first of all, locally incorporated as one of these 3 models. First one is the companies limited by guarantee registered under Companies Act 2016 or entity registered under the Societies Act 1966, or otherwise it must be entity registered under the Trustee Incorporation Act 1952. And most importantly, regardless whichever model that you want to incorporate under, you must be an approved entity registered also under the Income Tax Act 1967. Of course, right now, since we are talking about social impact projects, your non-profit organization, you must also be carrying out a social impact project. So ultimately, in short, there are many companies out there, they actually self-declare, they actually self-label themselves as non-profit organization. However, in order for them to really raise fund according to this guideline through a social exchange platform, they must first meet the requirements that we mentioned earlier.
Thanks, Johnson. Now, Khai, now it seems only properly registered non-profits that are also approved under the Income Tax Act can participate. Some might view this as overly restrictive, particularly for smaller social enterprises or grassroots movements. We have tons of those in KL doing really good work. But they aren't exactly formally structured yet. They're doing really meaningful work, but they're not formally, structured. What's your take on that? And do you see this level of restriction as a necessary step?
Yeah. Some may call this obstacle, right, to fundraise as evil. But if that is the case, I think this is really a necessary evil, because the whole initiative is to encourage people to contribute and to donate to social impact projects. At the same time, recognizing that the number one concern of donors would be the lack of transparency and accountability. So the solution to that concern is for project owners, for those who want to start a good initiative, a charitable cause, for example, to have a robust governance framework, clear and auditable reporting framework. And like it or not, you need to be of a certain size, you need to be of a certain maturity and of a certain establishment with certain resources to be able to meet all these governance requirements, auditing requirements and reporting requirements. So we need to understand that the guideline, while it is opening a more mature way to fundraise for social impact project, but at the same time, it doesn't prohibit the smaller grassroots movements that you just mentioned just now. It's just that for those initiatives, they perhaps have to find ways to comply with the requirements in order for them to be listed, right? Or they will have to fundraise through any other means. But of course, I think naturally for those participants who want to be listed on the social exchange platform, they will be looking at higher amount of fundraising. They will be looking they'll be looking at a larger sum of money in a sense to carry out their causes. So really, maybe the grassroots movements, the amount of funds that they are trying to raise is also that doesn't commensurate with the level of oversight that this initiative is imposing on them.
Fair point. Now, Johnson, the guidelines make it very clear that social exchange platforms exist to fund social impact projects.
Yes.
Now, that is quite a broad term, right? What actually qualifies under the guidelines as a social impact project? Are there specific categories that are being recognized and certain categories that are being excluded under these guidelines?
Yes, Zach, you are right. So everything in relation to this guideline is concerning social impact project. So the law itself, the guideline itself makes it very clear that only projects that fall within the recognized category of social impact project, they could conduct fundraising exercise through the social exchange platform. So what is social impact project? So the law itself, the guideline, actually define it quite clearly. Number one, there is a geographical requirement. What does it mean? The social impact project, they must actually be carried out in Malaysia. So beyond this geographical requirement, so the project, they must also fall within one of these three categories recognized by SC. They is either social welfare, cultural preservation and heritage, or last but not least, the environmental sustainability and conservation. So in other words, if right now as a non-profit organization, if they want to raise fund, first of all, it must concern social impact project. And then in order for them to properly recognize as a social impact project under the guideline, it must be within one of these three requirements: social welfare, cultural preservation and heritage, and as I mentioned earlier, environmental sustainability and conservation. So if the social impact project does not fall within one of these three categories, unfortunately, they will not qualify for fundraising. Of course, there are a lot of controversy, there are a lot of debates. They ask, then how about right now, I'm in the fourth category, so am I still be able to actually raise funds through the social exchange platform? Under the law, at this moment, the answer is no. But as we all know, the guidelines is subject to amendment. So potentially in the future, they may increase from 3 categories to 4 categories. But at this moment, at the time of writing the article and also recording, there are only these three very limited and very defined scope of categories only.
Great. So yeah, I can imagine there are a lot of causes that are being excluded.
Yep.
You know, just
Yes.
seeing these three categories. There are causes that are overseas, for example,
Yeah.
with the help war-torn countries
Yep.
or unfortunate nations or people who are refugees.
Yes.
So yeah, I really hope that this scope expands sooner or later.
Yeah.
Khai, now when these non-profits actually raise funds for their projects, I imagine there must be certain rules about how the fundraising is supposed to be conducted and
Yes.
what disclosures they need to make. Could you walk us through what are those requirements?
Yeah. In this case, again, we use the example of going public for a company to go public, to be publicly listed, right? The idea is very similar. Even before you can be listed on Bursa, on any stock exchange, you need to have a pre-listing disclosure. So the disclosure essentially by way of prospectus, right? Most of the time, depending on the market that you are being listed on, you will have to detail out your entire business operations, what your business activities are. In this case, what your social impact project is all about. What are the causes? What are the impact that you intend to create through the project, and how you intend to carry out the project and the initiatives. So all these things need to be first detailed out and be submitted to not Bursa, but rather the social exchange platform operators.
Yeah.
Afterwards, when your project has actually been approved, then only it will be all this so-called prospectus and pre-listing requirements will then be disclosed to interested donors, right? It will be published on the platform on the social exchange platform. So that would be the pre-listing or pre-fundraise requirements, right? Post-fundraise, there are also requirements, particularly on how you utilize your fund. You need to be transparent. You need to really be accountable to your donors. You actually need to submit a utilization of funds report to the platform operator. How you utilize the funds, where does the fund go, right? Does it align with the budget that you have set earlier before the pre-listing step? And other than funds, you also need to do what we call this a social impact report. So this is somewhat like a KPI sheet in a sense to see at the beginning those impact that you say you'll be achieving, that you try to achieve. Maybe you want to feed 3,000, 30,000 people. But after you have utilized the fund, after running the project for 1 year or 2 years, for example, did you really meet that KPI? So that is what the social impact report is for, is to see whether how much of the target you have actually met.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Johnson, let's talk about the funds themselves. When a non-profit raises money through these social exchange platforms, are there specific limits on how those funds can be used? For instance, on fees, administrative costs, and is there a percentage that can be collected by the operator as a fee or as a
Yeah, I love it. I mean, ultimately, because when anyone donate for any particular cause, we want to ensure that you are funding for the intended projects, for the intended goals, not to fund another vacation in Paris, right? So this is why the key concern is to really ensure that the funds are properly channeled towards the right charitable goal towards the social impact project that we are talking about. And so the law makes it very clear so that for any non-profit organization, they must not utilize more than 20% of the fund raised through the social action platform to cover any form of operation costs, which includes operator's fee, legal fees, and also just now, Khai did mention pre and post, you have to prepare certain kind of reports as well. And then in order for you to prepare those reports, it requires verification. You need people to draft, to verify, to read through those reports. So in other words, the entire operation cost, according to the law, it must be capped at maximum 20%. In other words, this means that at least 80% of the funds, it must be channeled towards the social impact project to ensure that the contribution will receive the maximum impact. So for illustration purposes, so let's say right now for the non-profit organization, they managed to raise 100,000 on a social exchange platform. So at least 80,000, it must be channeled towards the social impact project itself. Only 20,000, it can be used for all other miscellaneous operations costs. This really ensured the money is actually being channeled towards the right purpose, towards the intended goal.
Right. So now, you know, there are current social impact projects that actually are already raising a significant amount of
Yeah, of course.
funds, and perhaps maybe their percentage is different, right? Maybe it's 30% operational cost, maybe it's 40%, 50%.
90%.
90%.
Yeah, true.
So now the 20% cap is quite interesting.
Yeah.
Some say it's too generous, and others might argue it's too low. Like, if I'm only raising, let's say, 100,000 and 20% for operation,
Yeah, exactly.
like, how am I going to actually survive?
Survive,
And
right.
I have a
Exactly.
family as well,
Yeah.
right? So, Khai, considering the operational and compliance burden that comes with being in a regulated environment, what's your view? Do you think 20% is the right balance? Why is this the magic number?
It
Yeah.
should be 5%.
I also don't know why is this a magic number. I did think about it. I did try to do some research, maybe benchmarking against the other countries. So indeed, a few other countries, those that have maybe some sort of guidelines that impose similar requirements, they also put the range of cap around 20 and maximum 30% so far, but a lot hovering around 20 to 25%. Personally, I think that it is tight, especially when you have so much compliance overhead to consider, right? But then again, Zach, you made a very, very good point. It depends on how much you are raising. 20% of 100,000 may not be much, but if you are raising 1 million, 10 millions, then 20% suddenly seems like a very huge amount, right? Of course, I think it all depends on the project duration as well. If you are running a project that is supposed to go on for 5 years, then again, would 1 million, 20% of 1 million be really enough for you to carry out the entire duration, right? So I hate to be that lawyers that says it depends. But really, in this case, whether 20% is enough or not, it really depends on a few factors. The amount that you're raising, the duration, and how you are, what kind of social impact project are you trying to carry out, like, in a sense. Some will definitely cost more because maybe you need more pair of hands. You need to feed more volunteers. You may not pay your volunteers because they are volunteers, but at the same time, those people need to eat, right? Like, you ship them somewhere to a rural area to do certain kind of social impact project. You need to feed them as well. You need to take care of logistics. You need to take care of transportations. So 20% really may just nice cut it. So whether or not it is the right balance, I would say that there may not be a balance, but I think it is very tight. At the same time, it is definitely feasible. So for social impact project operators or social impact project owners, they really, this 20% cap really makes them, requires them to be careful with their spending, really plan it out, plan ahead, budget things properly. It is very tight, but at the same time, it is possible, I would say, for you to carry out and to run your projects.
Yeah, one thing that we have to remember is ultimately we are talking about non-profit organizations.
Yeah.
So this, whatever initiative it is not for them to actually make profit. And then the 20% cap is also force them to be creative, to be innovative towards the cost spending as well.
Yeah.
So they are actually being forced to be very efficient, to be very careful, to be very detailed towards the cost spending.
So, Johnson, let's close with a slightly more forward-looking question. Taking one step back, how do you see the introduction of these social exchange platforms shaping Malaysia's broader fundraising and capital market landscape? What long-term benefits do you actually think this framework will bring?
Yeah, I think that we are actually witnessing very meaningful evolutions. So in the past, we all know that fundraising activities has always been traditional fundraising activities. And then with the introductions, with the adoption of technology, we are seeing ECF, P2P, even IEO. And ultimately, we all know that all those fundraising activities are mainly designed, mainly catered for profit organizations, for commercial purposes. And with this entire social exchange platform, the underserved, those who actually needs money for social impact projects, they also have a proper means for them to raise funds through a very regulated, very structured process as well. So to be honest, I think that in the long run, this will definitely introduce very positive impact for our financial system. For Malaysia, we will also attract different forms of impact investment as well. Not only for the capital investment, for commercial purposes, but also for impact investment. So I think that this is just more than good regulation, but also good reputation building, national building for our country.
Yeah.
That's beautifully put.
Yeah, and I do see this as an evolution as well, right? I wanted to say this earlier, but essentially this is second iteration of government's initiative. About 7 years ago, 8 years ago, there was this initiative by Magic, right? Who then subsequently merged with Meranti. So at that point in time, when they were still operating under the establishment of Magic, they have this social impact exchange, which is called SIX. It does exactly the same thing as social exchange platform, but it's just that it's not at the level of regulations that we are seeing right now. So at that point in time, I was fortunate enough to be working with Magic. So that was my first engagement with Magic. They were trying to spin off, or rather sell off the project, transfer it, essentially, the entire SIX platform with all the IP and the digital platform and everything to Mosty. I don't know whether that then subsequently been enhanced and become the social exchange platform that we are seeing today. But definitely, looking at the initiative, it has definitely evolved from how it was back then. Essentially just a directory listing for people to go there and say that, hey, I want to fundraise. Can I list your project on your platform? Sure, come and list, as long as you fulfill maybe certain checklist requirements, right? To the kind of regulation today, I would say that Malaysia, we have definitely come a long way on this front. And I dare say that, as Johnson has mentioned just now, guidelines will also be subject to change. Definitely, it will be improved. More social impact projects will be allowed beyond the 3 categories that we have right now.
Wonderful. Thanks Khai, thanks Johnson. Now that brings us to the end of part 2 of our discussion on Malaysia's new guidelines on social exchange platforms. In these 2 episodes, we have explored both sides of the equation, the operators who will run these platforms and also the non-profits who will use them to fund their social impact projects. Now it's clear that this development represents more than just a regulatory update. It's a shift in how Malaysia views the role of capital markets in driving social change, and I think that is really a true sign of a maturing society. Thank you, Johnson. Thank you, Khai. And to our listeners, we hope these conversations have helped you understand the significance of this framework and its potential to transform the fundraising landscape. And if you're looking to operate a social exchange platform, or you are already operating a social impact project, do speak to our lawyers. They'd be happy to treat you to coffee and to listen to you and to hear about your impact projects and see how we can help you to potentially list or to operate in a clear and regulated manner. Until next time, this has been the Legal Insight podcast by HHQ, and I'm Zach. See you in the next episode.